The first thing the man did after devouring a transmigrator was burn through everything overnight, throwing away every last bit of his fortune, because inside the fragments of fate, he had caught a glimpse of the future. All the luxury before his eyes was nothing but the opening act to his future as a beggar. As the rightful heir of the Duke of Pfahlenberg, Fernand couldn't go 3 sentences without talking about money. That was why those self-righteous hypocrites loved mocking him as a miser. But so what? Money could buy food, magic gear, and the kind of comfort that made a man feel safe. Wasn't that far more useful than some empty reputation? That day, Fernand was sitting in the family hall, listening to the butler report this month's finances. The moment the words, "This month's income has slightly declined," reached his ears, he exploded. Fernand tore into the butler on the spot. Letting his profits drop even a little was no different from crossing the line. Just then, the sky suddenly darkened. A bolt of lightning came crashing straight toward the mansion. Before Fernand could react, a strange soul violently forced its way into his mind. The bastard was even shouting nonsense, claiming he had successfully transmigrated. Dream on. This precious body carried the Pfahlenberg bloodline and was packed with the secrets to building wealth. It was not something some nameless wandering soul had the right to touch. Fernand immediately gathered every ounce of his consciousness and built a mental defense, clashing head-on with that arrogant intruder. In no time, he crushed the transmigrator until his soul scattered into nothing. But Fernand never expected that the bastard's scraps of memory would force themselves into his mind. "Young master, are you all right?" a servant asked in a trembling voice. Fernand snapped back to his senses, only to feel countless foreign memories crashing chaotically through his head. The strange words forming those memories nearly gave him a heart attack on the spot. The end of the world was coming. Demons would invade the mortal realm in full force, and Imitian, a descendant of the first emperor, would rise as the hero of the continent. And Fernand Thallenberg, the heir to the prestigious Pfahlenberg dukedom, would supposedly be cast out by his family for colluding with demons, only to end up as a penniless beggar. What kind of damned joke was that? Falling from a soft bed piled with gold coins to sleeping under a bridge as a beggar would be worse than death. This prophecy was easily the greatest nightmare of his life. In the days that followed, Fernand combed through every intelligence network his family had, doing everything he could to uncover the origin of that soul. But naturally, he found absolutely nothing. What terrified him even more was that the events mentioned in the prophecy were slowly coming true. Using that future knowledge, Fernand seized every opening in the merchant guild and made a fortune. But the more wealth he gained, the more anxious he became, because it meant the future, where he became a beggar, was creeping closer step by step. He had to find a way to overturn that damned fate. To verify the prophecy even further, Fernand searched through every recent newspaper he could get his hands on. Beside him, a servant muttered under his breath, wondering if the young master was still suffering after effects from being struck by lightning. Just as Fernand was getting dizzy from reading, one piece of news made him freeze. Imitian, a descendant of the old imperial family, had successfully been admitted into the academy. It matched the prophecy perfectly. At this point, Fernand could no longer sit still, so he made the decision on the spot and set out for the southern swamp immediately. The moment he stepped into the swamp, the eerie aura hanging in the air made Fernand even more certain that the prophecy was real. He had locked 3 key prophecies firmly in his mind. First, he would be expelled from his family and become a beggar. Second, King Colomo would summon 72 ancient demons. Third, the hero who would save humanity, Imitian, as a descendant of the first emperor, Karanos, would enter the academy to find the first emperor's map. After that, he would come to the southern swamp to obtain the soul sword. This Imitian was not only the protagonist of the prophecy, but also directly tied to Fernand's future. But Fernand could not figure out how his future self had offended this guy so badly that he would end up in such a miserable state. After all, he had not seen the entire book of prophecy. Some parts were blurry and incomplete, so he could only make guesses based on the general outline. Following the clues from the prophecy, Fernand eventually found the injured Imitian outside the swamp dungeon. Looking at the glaring pool of blood on the ground, he cursed inwardly, realizing he had arrived too early. But since things had already come to this, he could only brace himself and pretend he had just gotten there. Fernand put on a stern face and acted as if he were scolding Imitian, reminding him that this was a freshman zone. After introducing himself, he gritted his teeth and took out a bottle of top-tier healing potion. That thing was 10 times more effective than a low-grade potion, and it had cost him a small fortune. But Fernand still had to sound generous. Even if your family has fallen, you are still a descendant of the imperial line. Consider this my investment in your future." Meanwhile, Fernan felt like his heart was bleeding. If he were not trying to change his fate, who in their right mind would hand over such an expensive potion for free? Imitian accepted the potion. His eyes filled with surprise. He probably never expected the so-called miser from the rumors to be this generous. Half an hour after Imitian entered the dungeon, Fernan quietly followed him in. By then, the dungeon was completely empty. Clearly that guy had already cleared it. There were magic lamps, scattered all around, yet Fernan could not sense the slightest trace of mana from them. What a complete waste. So many valuable magic lamps had just been tossed aside like trash. That kid clearly had no idea how important money was. Fernan winced in pain just looking at it. Could someone this clueless really become the hero who saved the world? According to the prophecy, the injured Imitian would find the soul sword inside the dungeon. Sure enough, by the time Fernan reached the altar, Imitian was already gone. Only faint traces of a soul sword remained. In the prophecy, he should have been transported to some remote alley in the Empire by now. In other words, everything in the prophecy was true, which meant Fernan's future as a beggar was also about to happen. That realization made Fernan's heart sink. He knew he had to latch on to this rising star called Imitian, but the Imitian in the prophecy cared deeply about his reputation. If Fernan approached him too recklessly, he might end up annoying him instead. After returning to the family estate, Fernan struggled with the problem and asked a servant, "If you find a guaranteed high return investment, but that person does not get along with you, what should you do?" The servant answered casually, "Young master, money can move mountains." Those words made everything click for Fernan. He was right. Demons destroying the world was simply a massive problem that temporarily threw people into chaos. But at its core, taking risks for the sake of future returns was still the same logic as investing. Personality differences were nothing but tiny details in the face of overwhelming wealth, and young Master Fernan just so happened to have plenty of money. So, he set off immediately, rushing back to the academy to find Imitian. The academy's dormitory hierarchy was extremely strict. The top 10 students in the entrance assessment lived in Rabidus Hall. Students ranked from 11th to 30th lived in Bless Hall. As for anyone ranked below 30th, they could only stay in Devis Hall. At that moment, inside one of the student rooms in Devis Hall, the voice of a sword was wildly complaining inside Imitian's head. A descendant of Armian living in a place like this? This is absurd. If the late emperor knew about this, he would probably crawl out of his grave to fix it himself. Imitian sighed helplessly. He could not exactly blame anyone else for his family's decline. After all, the first emperor had abolished hereditary succession and surrendered most of the royal family's lands and assets. That was why, over the past century, the imperial family had constantly been pressured by the 7 families of the imperial consorts. At this point, even their ancestral swordsmanship had been lost. Hearing that, the sword quickly comforted Imitian, saying that with his extraordinary talent and its guidance, he would one day restore the glory of the imperial family. Just then, Fernan knocked on the door. He got straight to the point and asked whether Imitian had time to join him for a simple meal. Imitian was just about to say he needed 10 minutes to get ready, but Fernan immediately put on a lecturing tone. "A senior invites you to dinner and you dare make me wait 10 minutes? Back in my day, when I was summoned, I ran out wearing nothing but my underwear." Imitian flinched in fear and hurriedly changed his answer to 5 minutes. Meanwhile, the sword silently grumbled inside his head. How dare some low-class nouveau riche family order around a descendant of the imperial line? Before long, the two of them arrived at the nearest restaurant. Imitian tightened his grip on the soul sword and asked Fernan warily what he wanted from him. Fernan acted completely casual. "Nothing special, I just wanted to treat you to a simple meal." Then he waved it off like it was no big deal, looking at the honest, almost naive look on Imitian's face. Fernan genuinely could not understand how his future self could possibly be ruined by someone like this. At the table, Fernan asked Imitian in a seemingly casual tone what his goal was after graduation. To his surprise, the moment Imitian heard that question, his eyes turned incredibly determined. He had always wanted to become a royal knight and reclaim his family's glory. Most people came to the academy to build connections, but Imitian had no interest in playing that game. He was already sick of people looking at him like a remnant of a fallen imperial family. Even if all they had left was a name, they had once been the imperial family of the empire. That piqued Fernan's interest. So this kid only looked gentle on the surface. Deep down, he was ambitious and clear about what he wanted. Fernan secretly felt relieved that he had not tried to sponsor him with money right away. Otherwise, he would have definitely wounded Imitian's pride. So, this had to be handled slowly. First, Fernand needed to pull back and let the bait work. Once the timing was right, he would bring Emetian into his own camp. In the blink of an eye, it was already late at night. A servant hurried over and reported to Fernand in a low voice. He said Lady Luina had stopped by earlier. She thought Fernand would return soon, so she kept waiting. But after 3 whole hours, when he still had not come back, she eventually left. The servant paused, then added that Lady Luina seemed to think Fernand had stood her up on purpose to take her down a peg. Fernand did not care at all. That woman had always been far too proud of her bloodline, so having that pride knocked down a little was actually better. The very next second, a sharp headache struck Fernand like a hammer. Another fragment of prophecy exploded inside his mind. Emetian was silently watching the figure of a woman. That woman was surrounded by inner demons, as if some unseen force had her trapped. Emetian's eyes were filled with determination, and he swore he would save her from the Duke of Pfahlenberg's family. Fernand froze, and a terrifying thought crossed his mind. Was this woman the reason Emetian hated him? Could his future charge of colluding with demons also be connected to her? And that woman was none other than Luina Belchev. The next day, Fernand deliberately asked to meet Luina. He had already guessed that she must have decided he had stood her up on purpose yesterday. After all, the Belchev family was buried in debt. Luina probably believed Fernand was taking advantage of their weakness and using his family's position to crush her pride. When Fernand saw Luina's back from a distance, he could clearly sense the fierce anger around her. She was obviously seething with resentment. As for Luina's family, the House of Belchev, they had once been a powerful house guarding the empire's northern border. On top of that, they were one of the 7 families with the right to elect the emperor. But during a massive monster wave, the Belchev family suffered a devastating blow. Their once ironclad glory collapsed overnight, and their former brilliance was completely gone. To save the family from extinction, Count Belchev had no choice but to sell off all their assets, even dumping the golden seal document that symbolized their elector status at a dirt cheap price. But all of that was still a drop in the bucket, and nowhere near enough to fill the enormous deficit. When the Belchev family had nowhere left to turn, the one that reached out was the Pfahlenberg family. And the man behind it all was Fernand's calculating father, Duke Yimben Pfahlenberg. Fernand knew perfectly well that his father had never truly pitied the Belchev family's misfortune. Unlike other noble families that specialized in magic, the Pfahlenberg family had always coveted the outstanding secret swordsmanship passed down through the Belchev line. To his father, the Belchev family's crisis was a gift from heaven, so the family acted in secret, blocking other nobles from helping the Belchevs, and eventually forcing the desperate family to borrow a massive debt from the Pfahlenbergs. Just like that. Although the Belchev family barely avoided extinction, they found themselves drowning in debt. Every year, crushing interest payments tormented them. Fernand's father had calculated everything perfectly. As long as he tightened the noose just a little more, the Belchev family would eventually break under the pressure and hand over their secret swordsmanship. But Fernand had his own concerns. According to the transmigrator's memories he had absorbed, Luina was destined to become Emiten's lover, and Emiten, as a descendant of the first emperor, had to restore his fallen family, carry the burden of saving the world, and somehow still find time to fall in love. The guy wanted everything. Compared to all that, the Belchev family's secret swordsmanship meant almost nothing to Luina. Fernand knew very well that since Luina would eventually get involved with Emetian, he at least had to make sure she did not hate the Pfahlenberg family. Otherwise, if Emetian targeted him in the future, his fate of becoming a beggar might truly be impossible to change. So Fernand took the initiative and walked up to her, trying his best to sound sincere. Lady Luina, I'm truly sorry about yesterday. Things got so chaotic all of a sudden, and I ended up forgetting our appointment. I really didn't stand you up on purpose. Luina's face showed almost no emotion as she said flatly, it doesn't matter anymore. After all, she was always the one standing on the weaker side. Being treated unfairly was something she had long since gotten used to. Since Fernand said it was not intentional, she would let it go. So why had he gone out of his way to ask her here today? Fernand quickly thought about how he could win her favor and smoothly convince her to work with him. Then he cleared his throat and slowly began. As you know, starting from the second year, the magic department and the night department will have joint courses. Before he could finish, Luina cut him off, her tone already full of rejection. So what you're saying is that you want to team up with me, right? Sorry, but I'm not interested. I'm currently ranked 2nd in the night department, while you're only 10th. I have better options for a partner. Teaming up with you gives me no benefit at all. Fernand immediately put his offer on the table. If you team up with me and agree to cooperate for the next 3 years, I can waive all the interest your family owes the Pfahlenberg family during that period. There is one condition though. You have to accept my sponsorship terms. Luina looked completely confused. Her eyes filled with disbelief. She could not understand why Fernan wanted her as a partner, and was even offering financial support on top of it. None of this made any sense. Fernan saw right through her pride. You're still receiving a scholarship from the academy, aren't you? But I know you send almost all of that money back home to help cover your family's expenses. Aside from the dormitory assigned by the academy, your living conditions are even tighter than those of an ordinary commoner, and my sponsorship has no hidden meaning. I simply believe you are a rare talent, and that makes you worth investing in. Fernan knew very well that Luina, like Emitian, was the type of person who valued trust and honor above all else. The Pfahlenbergs and the Belchevs were both noble families, but their positions were not equal. Even if the Belchev family's reputation might be somewhat higher, they still could not compare to a descendant of the imperial line, and, unlike Emitian's Armian family, there was a direct debt relationship between the Pfahlenbergs and the Belchevs. Even if Luina was unwilling, she had no real choice in the end. Fernan continued, "What I'm telling you is that this is not the time to let your pride get in the way, and no matter how much resentment you hold toward the Pfahlenberg family, I want to invest in your talent. That is not an empty line. In fact, I watched your swordsmanship performance some time ago. Your swordsmanship was pure, full of life, and genuinely impressive." Fernan was certain that someone like Luina, gifted yet unrecognized, could never reject a person who truly acknowledged her talent. So he changed his approach, and his tone became unusually serious. He even made it deliberately cheesy. "To this day, I still cannot forget the first time I saw your swordsmanship. Your swordsmanship was beautiful and graceful, carrying both nobility and justice. Its speed cut through the air faster than light and shadow, yet it was as quiet and gentle as the flutter of a butterfly's wings. Your figure dances in my mind every night, leaving me unable to sleep." Luina's face turned bright red from his embarrassingly sweet words, and she immediately shouted at him to shut up. But Fernan did not stop. Instead, he said with a completely serious face, "I cannot stop yet, because I still haven't found the perfect sentence to describe the beauty of your swordsmanship." Luina could not take it anymore, and agreed to team up with him on the spot. Fine, I'll team up with you, okay?" After that, Fernan and Luina signed a detailed contract. The contract clearly stated that during their 3 years of cooperation, all interest earned by the Belchev family would be waived, and the sponsorship terms would be kept strictly confidential. After graduation, the contract would automatically end. As for Luina, all she had to do was become Fernan's course partner for those 3 years. For the Belchev family, which was trapped in a debt crisis, these terms were far too tempting. She had no real reason to refuse. Later, Fernan heard that when Luina mentioned the matter to her attendant, there was a faint trace of pride in her voice. She said Fernan had seen potential in her swordsmanship and called it noble, beautiful, pure, and full of soul. He had even said he could not find the perfect sentence to capture that beauty. Her attendant, however, was furious. That miser must be scheming again. How dare he try to seduce the young lady like this? Just look at that chiseled face of his and those deep, captivating eyes. He was clearly doing it on purpose. Luina shook her head. No matter how she looked at it, Fernan did not seem like he was pursuing her. Still, having 3 years of interest waived would be an enormous help to her family. Not long after, Fernan's servant arrived before them. "Lady Luina, my young master is waiting for you at the training arena. He hopes you can come as soon as possible." Since enrolling at the academy, Luina Belchev had held the second-place spot in the night department year after year, and the first-ranked second-year night student was Armando Wiltz. Even now, Luina had never once defeated him. Even so, everyone agreed that Luina had the potential to become a royal knight. Since only a few dozen people across the entire continent could earn that title, there was no doubt she had the talent to reach that level. But Fernan felt that something like an inner demon seemed to be lingering inside her. Whether she was truly a diamond in the rough could only be known after testing her. The moment Luina saw Fernan, she bluntly asked what this was supposed to mean. Fernan shrugged and said casually, "I just wanted you to know that partnering with me is not completely useless. I want to prove that I am not as hopeless as you think." Luina answered without holding back. Fernan might be ranked 10th and qualified to live in Rabidus Hall, so he was certainly not weak. But there was still a clear gap between 2nd place and 10th place. Fernan simply smiled, unconcerned. Either way, they would only know after trying. Luina did not waste words and told him to put his guard up. Fernan immediately activated his magic. Several sharp crystal stones shot toward Luina in an instant. But in the next moment, she slung her longsword and easily shattered them. As sparks burst everywhere, Luina seized the opening and charged straight at Fernan. Fernan remained calm and used earth magic. A thick wall of earth rose instantly, temporarily slowing her advance. Then, Fernan quickly gathered power and cast another earth spell. With a thunderous boom, the spell erupted and actually tore up the floor of the training arena. The floor of that arena had been reinforced with layer after layer of magic. Ordinary spells could not even leave a scratch on it. Luina was completely stunned. Had Fernan Fallenberg been hiding his strength all along? Was this his true power when he went all out? She could hardly believe her eyes. Fernan could actually cast high-level magic of this caliber, back to back. This was not the kind of strength a mere 10th place student should have. She had truly underestimated him before. At this rate, she was probably going to lose. Just as Luina gathered every ounce of her fighting aura and charged straight at Fernan. Fernan suddenly raised his hand and surrendered. Luina's chest heaved violently. He had clearly pissed her off. "Are you messing with me right now?" Fernan spread his hands and said that was not the case. He had simply run out of mana. After all, how could a mage with no mana left possibly beat a knight? Luina observed him carefully and realized Fernan really did not seem to be acting. His mana was truly completely drained. In the end, she had technically won, but she felt strangely irritated. She was the victor, yet there was no satisfaction at all. The whole win just felt way too frustrating. Then, Fernan seemed to suddenly remember something. He took out a beautifully wrapped bag of chocolates from his pocket. "This is your reward for beating me. You like chocolate, right? This is whiskey chocolate produced by my family. If you don't like this one, I also have Freudian's specialty, World Tree Bark Chocolate, or Felicia Kingdom's famous Kraken Ink Chocolate. Whatever you want, just say the word. I have everything." Luina instantly reacted. Had Fernan secretly investigated her behind her back? Fernan said he was not bored enough to investigate only her. He had simply checked the records of every ranked student. "But you might want to wipe your drool before you talk." Luina said she did not want any. Her actions, however, completely betrayed her. After a brief pause, she still could not help asking. Fernan clearly possessed enough mana to fire off powerful spells in succession, and even the limits of his magic were hard to predict. So why was someone like him only ranked 10th in the year? Fernan smiled mysteriously. "Isn't that obvious? A merchant never steps into the spotlight too easily." After returning to the Duke of Fallenberg's mansion, the attendant stared at the wreckage before him and froze. How did the mana storage devices and mana amplifiers end up blown apart like this? Fernan casually explained that he had just sparred with Luina, and every device he brought with him had been destroyed by her. In the end, even his own mana had been completely drained. The attendant still could not understand why Fernan would use such rare materials just to duel Lady Luina. Was she really worth him going this far? Fernan said this was, of course, an investment in the future. That made the attendant look at him with even deeper concern. "Young master, is this another after effect from when you got struck by lightning?" Fernan ignored the attendant's remark. Inwardly, he recalled how Imitian had once described Luina. The Belchev family's swordsmanship was not only swift and elegant, but even carried a certain nobility. Now Fernan finally understood why his father was so obsessed with the Belchev family's secret swordsmanship. Luina truly had exceptional talent. But why had she never taken first place? Could it be because her equipment was not good enough? At that moment, the attendant began worrying again. How was the young master planning to explain this to the Duke? The Belchev family's secret swordsmanship was the Duke's lifelong obsession. Fernan also felt a little nervous. After all, at the time he had acted on impulse and made that agreement with Luina. Now that he thought about it, he really was worried. Would his father throw him out of the family? The servant shook his head and said solemnly that the Duke would not throw him out. He would probably kill him outright, mainly because expulsion required paperwork. After struggling with it again and again, Fernan still wrote a letter to his father, honestly reporting that he had teamed up with Luina and disrupted his father's plan. Then he waited anxiously for his father's reply. He could already picture his father reading the letter, clutching his chest in anger and collapsing on the spot. Terrible thoughts kept popping into his head. How was he supposed to explain the demon issue? And what if his father got so angry that he really tried to snap his neck? A few days later, his father's reply finally arrived. Fernan took a deep breath and braced himself for the storm. His attendant stood nearby with a miserable look, as if today might be the last day he'd ever serve the young master. Fernan immediately glared at him. Don't jinx it. Even so, deep down, Fernan was not exactly confident. Could this become the reason he got kicked out of the family? But wasn't he supposed to be expelled because of imitation? Fernand anxiously opened the letter. The more he read, the more panicked he became, because the letter basically asked if he had been possessed by a demon. With no other choice, he immediately set off to meet his father in person. Fernand knew very well that he could not reveal the existence of the prophecy book. After all, there was no way to prove it. It existed only inside his head. If he told the truth, his father would either think he really was possessed by a demon, or assume he was making excuses to burn through the family fortune. So Fernand had to present something equal in value, something that could offset the loss from investing in the Belchev family. A short while later, he arrived at the main family estate. His father sat in the study, his tone giving away neither anger nor calm. He only said Fernand looked more normal than expected, though his eyes were clearly examining him. He had thought Fernand would come back raving like a madman, or perhaps completely insane from taking strange medicine. If not, then maybe some demon that died during the first emperor's era had crawled back and possessed his body. If none of those were true, then Fernand had better explain why he had done something like this. Fernand straightened his back, trying to sound as confident as possible. Because I found an investment more valuable than the secret swordsmanship. His father motioned for him to continue. Fernand shook his head instead and played coy, saying he could not reveal it yet. Fernand. His father was no longer speaking like they were having a polite discussion. His voice turned sharp in an instant, and he slammed the desk so hard it rattled. Right now, Fernand was a criminal who had acted on his own and damaged the family's interests. But Fernand would not change his mind. As long as his father handed the Belchev matter entirely over to him, he guaranteed he would bring back returns greater than the secret swordsmanship. His father snapped at him, asking where that confidence even came from. He had never raised Fernand to become someone who acted so recklessly. Did Fernand really think throwing a tantrum would make things work out? Seeing that he could not convince his father this way, Fernand had no choice but to reveal his trump card. It was information mentioned in the prophecy book. He had not wanted to use this card so early, but now he had no other option. In exchange for being allowed to handle the Belchev family on his own, Fernand could provide a piece of intelligence known only to him. That immediately surprised his father. Apparently, Fernand had been running a private intelligence organization in secret. Was that organization even stronger than the family's own intelligence network? Still, his father was willing to hear what this so-called major intelligence was. West of the Aras Mountains, within Viscount Donetz's territory, there is an undiscovered magic crystal mine. The value of that mine is enough to cover the losses caused by the Belchev incident. It may even bring the family even greater wealth. Ever since Fernand devoured the transmigrator's soul and saw the miserable future where he ended up as a beggar, he had made up his mind to use his knowledge of the future to overturn his fate. Magic crystals were top-grade ores filled with mana, and their value was beyond enormous. The information Fernand revealed about the magic crystal mine in the Aras Mountains had only been briefly mentioned in the prophecy book, with no detailed description at all. On top of that, he had never personally gone to confirm it, so he had no idea how large the mine actually was, but at the very least, he could use it to buy himself precious time. Fernand silently figured that the merchant fleet belonging to Viscount Donetz's family had sunk in a typhoon not long ago, causing their finances to collapse. That weakness was the perfect opening. He could use it to find a reasonable excuse to get involved with that mine. Fernand knew very well that the existence of the prophecy book would eventually be discovered. All he could do was buy himself as much time as possible to set up his plans. His father's anger was temporarily calmed. If what Fernand said was true, then it could indeed cover the losses caused by his actions. But before that, his father would first send people to verify whether the information was real. Since confirming it would take time anyway, Fernand was told to return to the academy and focus on his studies. Once there was a result, his father would naturally call him back. Fernand let out a breath of relief. That conversation had felt like it shaved 10 years off his life. After Fernand left, his father immediately turned and reprimanded the butler. He was now somewhat disappointed in him. A mine that even Fernand knew about had gone completely unnoticed by the family's intelligence network. The butler quickly lowered his head and apologized, not daring to breathe too loudly. Then his father changed the subject, his tone becoming strangely meaningful. More importantly, what do you think of Fernand? He actually dared to negotiate with me. He's finally starting to look like a proper merchant. But how exactly did he discover that magic crystal mine? In that case, investigate that intelligence group of his thoroughly. Who knows? That team might have some unusual talent when it comes to locating mineral veins. As his father thought back on Fernand's choices, he could not help feeling a little emotional. That boy clearly had excellent sensitivity for fire element mana, yet because he knew ores could be exchanged for vast amounts of wealth, He had resolutely chosen the path of an earth mage. Ever since he was young, his eyes would light up the moment he heard the word, mine. Who would have thought he would actually pull something off this time? It was honestly a pleasant surprise. After a brief pause, his father instructed the butler to look into Luina of the Belchev family. He wanted to know exactly what method she had used to win over his dense blockhead of a son, Fernan. His father understood Fernan far too well. Without a proper reason, that boy would never invest in anything lightly. But this time, Fernan could not even explain his investment reason properly. That meant he had definitely been captivated by something else. If it was not young love, then what else could it be? What on earth could make someone who loved money even more than his father give up his obsession with wealth right in front of him? Meanwhile, gossip about team pairings had already spread through every corner of the academy. Even Luina heard that Arya Torta had partnered with Kalad Neff. Apparently, right after Luina agreed to team up with Fernan, Arya immediately went and formed a team with Khaled. Arya had originally been ranked 5th in the Night Academy, but with her rapid progress lately, she had already climbed to 4th. There were also rumors saying Luina must have teamed up with Fernan for the money. Luina had expected that much, and it was still within what she could tolerate. After all, this deal helped her family far too much. At that moment, Fernan handed her a heavy package. This is for you. Inside are elixirs and exchange vouchers. The elixirs were refined from mandrake root. The vouchers can be used at 5 stores under the Duke of Phalenberg Merchant Guild to exchange for top-grade equipment. Luina froze on the spot. She could not understand why Fernan was giving her these things. After all, she had no way to repay something this expensive. Fernan simply asked if she had forgotten their agreement. He would sponsor her until she completed her studies. Luina could not help asking whether he really did not feel any pain spending money on such precious elixirs and high-end weapons. Fernan denied it out loud, saying he did not feel bad at all and that this was a necessary investment. In reality, it physically pained him. This had cost him a fortune. But then he thought about it again. If this could earn Luina's favor and keep him from going bankrupt and becoming a beggar in the future, then every coin was worth it. Besides, if Luina became stronger, she could help fight demons in the future. That made the deal even more profitable. But Luina still felt these things were far too valuable, and she could not accept them. She remained hesitant, her eyes filled with conflict, as she tried to refuse the sponsorship. Fernan, however, seriously reminded her that refusing sponsorship would count as a breach of contract, triggering the termination clause and resulting in a massive penalty fee. After saying that, he turned and left, afraid she might change her mind again. Luina looked down at the package in her hands, her mind full of confusion. There was no penalty fee clause in the contract, was there? Fernan had actually lied just to give her such expensive things. Could it be exactly as her attendant said? Was he trying to pursue her, then use that chance to take her family's secret swordsmanship? If that was the case, then she would test him herself. No matter what scheme Fernan had in mind, he would never get his hands on the Belchev family's secret swordsmanship. On Fernan's side, he arrived at the classroom ahead of time. He knew Imitian would attend this class today. It was the first war and practical sparring class for first-year knight students. This class was famous for holding formation sparring on the very first day and accurately assessing each student's level. According to the prophecy, Imitian, who had obtained the Soul Sword Gardener, would stand out during this class and officially begin his journey as the hero destined to save the world. I didn't expect to see you in a place like this, Fernan Fallenberg. Just then, a familiar voice came from nearby. Fernan turned around and saw Ludger Schwaben, the second prince of the current imperial family. Ludger curiously asked whether Fernan had come here because there was a freshman he had his eye on. After all, Ludger always paid attention to anyone capable of entering the rankings. So Fernan had probably come specifically to watch Imitian, right? Fernan answered with a smile, while secretly calculating how to draw Imitian closer. Of course, after all, he is of the former imperial bloodline. No one from his family has entered the academy in the past 100 years. It's only natural that everyone is curious about him. The Schwaben family that Ludger belonged to became the current imperial family after the new emperor was chosen a century ago. Now, the throne had already passed down to the third generation. They and Imitian's army and family originally came from the same lineage. But now, one was the current imperial family while the other was the former imperial family, making their relationship extremely complicated, especially for someone like Ludger, who valued authority above all and wanted the Schwaben family to keep the throne. There was no way he could ignore Imitian, who ranked 5th in the line of succession. At that moment, Fernan noticed someone else nearby, who was also staring intently at Imitian. It was Barian Calburden, who had entered this year as the second-ranked student in the Knight Academy. The Kelberden family he belonged to had long been eyeing the Armian family's position, hoping to replace them and reclaim their former status as one of the imperial consort families. So it was him. In other words, was this the beginning of Barian's connection with Ludger? Fernan thought to himself that every hero needed a rival on his path to greatness. According to the prophecy book, Ludger would approach Barian and have him defeat Imitian to prove to the world that the past was only the past. So it seemed Barian was Imitian's destined rival, and the next sparring match was Imitian against Antod. Ludger and Barian both remained in the stands, ready to witness the true starting point of Imitian's path as a hero. Fernan muttered to himself. The prophecy book said that the young hero Imitian would defeat Antod in this sparring match. From there, the name Imitian would officially begin spreading among professors and students. So this match would prove whether Fernan's investment in Imitian was correct. As soon as the sparring match was announced, the fight officially began. At first, Imitian was completely suppressed by Antod and had almost no chance to fight back. Someone nearby started whispering that the opponents were supposedly chosen at random, but Imitian's luck was just awful. Antod had ranked 10th in the entrance exam. For Imitian, who had entered in 38th place, he was definitely a troublesome opponent. Ludger also lost interest and stood up, ready to leave. He had not expected Imitian to be suppressed this badly, but only moments later, something unexpected happened in the sparring arena. Imitian suddenly burst forward, and his sword struck Antod's clothes. Everyone froze in shock. Antod was actually being pushed back by Imitian? This guy was only ranked 38th. Perhaps Imitian's sudden offensive at the start had shaken Antod. That alone proved Antod lacked experience, which allowed the battle to turn around. Antod could not accept losing to a median, who was ranked so far below him. In his fury, he actually unleashed fighting aura. Red aura wrapped around his body, making him look incredibly imposing. The surrounding whispers quickly grew louder. It seemed that even if Imitian was stronger than expected, he would still lose to Antod in the end. Besides, for someone supposedly lacking talent, forcing the 10th ranked student to use fighting aura was already impressive enough. Fernan sneered inwardly. Calling Imitian talentless was a complete joke. He did not lack talent. His previous environment had simply never allowed him to display it. After all, this guy was the world's chosen protagonist in the prophecy. Not long after, the sparring match reached its conclusion. As expected, the winner was Imitian. Fernan was ecstatic. The prophecy was coming true step by step. He had definitely chosen the right person. Imitian had to be carefully nurtured from now on, and Fernan had to find a way to bring him onto his side. Which meant next, it was time to win Luina over. When Fernan appeared in the theory classroom, the people around him were still talking. Had those two really become partners? Why would Luina choose Fernan? It had to be because of money, right? Fernan ignored all of it and walked straight to Luina's side. How was the elixir I gave you last time? Luina was actually very happy. After drinking the elixir, she could feel that her strength had improved quite a bit, and the new equipment handled perfectly. But she still answered casually. It was not bad. Just then, two professors walked over. Looks like all of you have already formed your teams on your own. One of them was a female professor dressed in the uniform of the magic department, carrying herself with an elegant air. She was Professor Rosalia from the magic department. The man beside her was Professor Glad from the night department. Starting today, the two of them would jointly oversee the combined course between the magic department and the night department. So now, every student would receive a map. Professor Glad smoothly chimed in. The first class will be a practical exercise. The best way to confirm what you have learned is through actual combat. After that, every student would be teleported into the wilderness. Their destination was marked on the map, and they had to reach it within 4 hours. They could not arrive too early or too late. They had to arrive exactly 4 hours later at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Defeating other students along the way would also earn bonus points. A moment later, Fernan and Luina were teleported to an unfamiliar place. Dense trees surrounded them, and the air was filled with the scent of soil, grass, and leaves. The two were just about to check the map and confirm their location. But the moment they turned around, they saw two students, Jane Hex and Ned Perrin. Fernan thought to himself that bottom-tier students like these were not even worth wasting time on. Normally, he might have just walked away, but since defeating them would earn extra points this time, there was no reason to let them go. Luina did not waste a word. With one light leap, she charged straight forward. The two students quickly raised their arms to defend, but Luina still struck them with a single slash, eliminating them instantly. Fernan was a little surprised. He had not expected the maps handed out by the professors to be enchanted with defensive magic. Now he just wondered whether those maps could be sold for money. Meanwhile, Professor Glad watched the monitoring screen and said another team had been eliminated, and the elimination speed was even faster than he had expected. So far, no students had been eliminated because of monsters. Every elimination had come from conflicts between students. Glad then asked Rosalia if there were any teams she was especially interested in this time. Based on grades, Ludger and Armando's team was the strongest. Kalad and Arya's team was also worth watching, but the team Rosalia was most interested in was Luina and Fernan. After all, those two were already a hot topic among the students. Glad felt that this team was a disadvantage for Luina. Was it really because of money after all? Besides, Fernan did not seem all that obsessed with grades either. Rosalia, however, looked confused. She did not understand why Glad thought that. If Fernan wanted to, he could easily raise his rank. In her eyes, Fernan did not need to rely on Luina at all. Because no matter what happened, Fernan always stayed in 10th place. It was common for a genius to hold first place forever. But staying locked at 10th place forever, did that not seem strange? On top of that, Fernan's written exam scores were almost always perfect. He basically lost points on purpose during the practical sections every time, and he always lost just enough to stay right on the cutoff line required to live in Rabidus Hall. In other words, Fernan had been hiding his true strength all along. Some time ago, when the training arena was destroyed, the professors had spent a great deal of effort trying to find the culprit. In the end, they discovered that Fernan and Luina had been responsible, with the strength of ordinary students. Causing that level of damage should have been impossible. That made Glad even more curious. Why had Fernan been hiding his strength before? And more importantly, why had he stopped hiding it now? At that moment, Fernan was using earth magic to read the terrain marked on the map, while sensing the flow of mana underground. He quickly confirmed the right direction. Luina, meanwhile, casually eliminated several students they ran into. Her movements were sharp, clean, and without the slightest hesitation. Fernan reminded Luina that they only needed to head northeast from there. Just then, a blinding bolt of lightning magic suddenly shot toward them. Fernan immediately used earth magic to form a thick earthen wall to block it. Didn't expect to run into you here, Fernan Pfahlenberg. The one who appeared was Luina's former partner, Kalad Neff. His eyes looked vicious, making it clear he had not come in peace. Luina angrily scolded him, asking how he could suddenly attack from behind. That was a coward's move. Kalad sneered, his tone full of contempt. There's no such thing as cowardly in battle. Did you forget what the professor said? This is practical combat, and running into each other this quickly must be fate. With that, he gripped his longsword with both hands and prepared to fight. Luina could not understand why Kalad was so angry, but Fernan saw through him at a glance. He probably felt like his teammate had been stolen, and was bitter about it. Luina said coldly that she was not anyone's possession, so there was no such thing as being stolen. What a narrow-minded guy, still clinging to something that was already over. Their nonchalant banter completely enraged Kalad. Fighting aura surged around his body, making it clear this clash could no longer be avoided. Still, the enemy was a high-ranking team, which meant beating them would bring more bonus points. Luina then warned Fernan that these opponents were not weak, so he could not just stand back this time. Fernan told her not to worry one bit. You fight in front. I'll support you with magic from behind. Although the two of them had barely practiced working together. With Fernan's magic and Luina's refined swordsmanship, winning this fight would not be difficult. With that thought, Fernan raised both hands and immediately activated earth magic. Countless chunks of stone shot up from the ground, flying like razor-sharp arrows as they rained toward Kalad. At the same time, Professor Rosalia was staring at the monitoring screen. She exclaimed that a fierce conflict seemed to have broken out in the western mountain area. Professor Glad leaned closer and guessed that the students might have already started fighting monsters. Rosalia immediately enlarged the image. No, monsters don't appear in that area. It's the two high-ranking teams we mentioned earlier. They've run into each other. In other words, they would finally get to see Fernan's true strength with their own eyes. On the battlefield, blue lightning and red energy clashed and intertwined. Luina suddenly felt her body become much lighter. Was this support magic? When had Fernan secretly cast it? Fernan turned back and winked at her. Well, I told you I'm more than just a 10th place student. Luina was both flustered and annoyed. This is not the time to get distracted. Let's deal with Arya first. Before the words even left her mouth, their long swords slammed violently together. At the same time, wild blue lightning erupted around Kalad. The next second, several arcs of electricity instantly wrapped around Luina. Meanwhile, Arya rushed in, swinging her golden longsword. She was about to strike Luina's vital point. But then, a massive rock suddenly dropped from the sky and blocked the attack head-on. Arya's eyes widened in shock. Unable to understand what had just happened or where that rock had come from, Khalad also immediately looked around. Then he realized that Luina, who had been right in front of him moments ago, had somehow been transferred to Fernan's side. Fernan told Luina this was a new spell recently developed by his family, one that could freely swap anything of the same weight. Luina was utterly speechless and asked how Fernan knew her weight. Fernan innocently spread his hands and said it was written in the student records. Besides, the rock only looked heavy. Its actual weight was the same as hers, so it was not that heavy. Luina clenched her teeth in anger. She wanted to tear that student file to shreds on the spot. By then, Khalad had gathered dozens of bolts of lightning, merging them into a blinding pillar of light. It was dual casting far beyond the level of an ordinary student. It was also the trump card that allowed Khalad to secure his spot at the top of the second-year rankings. But Fernan's eyes lit up instead. He began rapidly chanting a spell. He had studied how to block this move before, and now he could finally test the result. Khalad's lightning pillar erupted instantly and shot straight toward Fernan. A dazzling blue light swallowed everything in the blink of an eye. But when the dust cleared, Fernan was still standing there, completely unharmed. Khalad was so shocked he could barely speak. How was this possible? Why had his magic done absolutely nothing to Fernan? Of course, Fernan had made a few small improvements beforehand. He shook his wrist and showed them the storage device attached to it, which could absorb mana. It was expensive and troublesome to make, but the effect was definitely good. If he could refine it for mass production and put it on the market, it would make a fortune. Khalad's face turned red with rage as he accused Fernan of using an artifact, calling it utterly shameless. Fernan raised an eyebrow and asked him, didn't he just say there was no such thing as shameless in battle? And had he forgotten that the professor said this was practical combat training? Khalad was left speechless. Fernan seized the timing and immediately shouted at Luina, now, take down Arya. A blue light flashed in Luina's eyes. Then, she swung her longsword and instantly forced Arya back. At the same time, a large group of examinees appeared not far away. Someone guessed that none of the student mages could block Khalad's lightning magic. It seemed Fernan and Luina were out of luck this time. Ludger, however, shook his head and felt the truth was exactly the opposite. Fernan had always hated standing out, so he had been hiding his strength all along. But now that he had teamed up with Luina, he could no longer coast like before. He had to keep up with Luina's pace, and on top of that, Luina was the type who was obsessed with grades. If Fernan got serious, his ranking would definitely shoot up fast. So how could Ludger possibly let such a potential rival run free? Then, Ludger turned to the examinees behind him and said that since they had chosen to follow him, he could guarantee they would reach the destination safely. And just as he had promised earlier, this test would also give them a high ranking. But before that, they had to eliminate one team first, Fernan Fallenberg and Luina Belchev. Meanwhile, Luina raised her hand and cut down a troll blocking their path. They were getting closer and closer to the destination now. At this pace, they might actually take first place. Fernan, however, was staring at the troll's corpse, his eyes lighting up. Troll blood was a key ingredient in potion making. Luina rolled her eyes at him and asked if money was the only thing left in his head. Still, enough small talk. She had to take first place. Fernan shrugged and calculated how many teams they had eliminated so far. Luina tightened her grip on her longsword and told him it was already 8 teams. Once they won the generous reward, it would be far more profitable than the pocket change he was trying to collect. The moment Luina finished speaking, she suddenly stopped, her expression turning extremely serious. Seeing that, Fernan also dropped his joking look. I feel it too. The team ahead had at least 20 people, and that was only a conservative estimate. When Luina saw that the figure landing before them was Armando, she drew her sword without hesitation and charged into battle. Their long swords slammed violently together. The impact forced both of them back, but Luina instantly steadied herself, then charged again. Blue sword light and golden aura twisted together in a fierce clash. At the same time, golden flames ignited around Ludger as he lunged toward Fernan, but intense red energy also surged around Fernan, allowing him to take the attack head-on. Ludger was shocked. He had not expected Fernan to have mastered this kind of power as well. A fierce fighting spirit flared in Fernan's eyes. The red energy formed into a blade and clashed directly with the golden flames. With a thunderous boom, a dazzling explosion swallowed the entire area. Ludger panted heavily and said Fernan had originally looked like he only wanted to hide in the back and watch the show. But this guy had turned around and wiped out half his people in an instant. That did not look like the behavior of the Pfahlenberg heir who supposedly cared only about money. Fernan shrugged and said he just felt like taking first place for fun this time. Ludger could not help scoffing. That idea was far too dangerous, and he could not allow it. Then he changed the subject and proposed that they settle things peacefully. After all, there was less than an hour left before the exam ended. If they kept fighting now, none of them would reach the destination, so why not let him and Armando take first place, while Luina and Fernan took second? Luina angrily shouted back that she would rather die fighting than hand it over. Fernan spread his hands in mock helplessness. You heard her. Looks like my partner is not interested. Ludger's gaze turned cold. Since the negotiation had failed, he would see what the two of them were really made of. Fernan chuckled and said they should save the match for next time. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly raised his hand, and his staff erupted with blinding light. Ludger shouted in alarm, "Scatter!" Beneath their feet was a magic trap Fernan had prepared in advance. But his team had already been blasted away by the sudden magic, losing their ability to fight in an instant. Fernan put away his staff, tapped Luina on the shoulder, and signaled for her to leave quickly. Later, at the final destination of the test, Professor Glad smiled and announced that the test had successfully concluded, and the final rankings would now be revealed. First place, Luina Belchev and Fernan Pfahlenberg. Second place, Ludger Schwaben and Armando Donetz. Luina's expression did not change much, since the result had mostly been within expectations. But she still had not expected that two people with such incompatible personalities could actually take first place together. Right after that, Luina suddenly asked if Fernan knew the freshman named Imitian. Hearing that, Fernan gave a slight nod. Luina continued recalling that she had met Imitian a few nights earlier. The situation had been rather interesting, almost like the scene Fernan once described, where she secretly watched him practice swordsmanship. Fernan's face suddenly turned pale, because at that moment, a hidden part of the prophecy was slowly surfacing inside his mind. In the vision, Imitian was reaching out his hand, sincerely asking Luina to become his knight. But Luina firmly chose not to take that hand. What appeared next was a blood-red sky, so heavy it made it hard to breathe. Thick miasma filled the air, suffocating everything around them. An evil figure powerful enough to destroy the world had locked its gaze firmly onto Imitian, and Luina stood protectively in front of him, her back to him. In the prophecy, Imitian asked in confusion what Luina was doing. Luina's voice slowly rang out. You once asked me if I would become your knight. Back then, I refused you. But now, things are different. I know who you are, and I know what you are fighting for, and this is my fate. A knight is both a sword that cuts down enemies and a shield that protects others. Before her words even faded, Luina gripped her longsword and charged without hesitation toward the demon god known as Andromalius. The vision shifted again, this time to a hospital bed. Imitian looked at Luina with blazing fury in his eyes. The bastards who tried to drag you and the Belchev family down were the Pfahlenbergs, weren't they? What a filthy bunch of rich scum. Fernan instantly exploded. He struggled to sit up and roared at Imitian. You little punk, how dare you talk about an upperclassman like that? Luina quickly asked Fernan what had happened. Had he suddenly collapsed because he overused his power? Fernan froze. Only then did he realize he had just passed out. His mind immediately began racing, so this was the point where Imitian started seeing him as an enemy. That brat's hostility toward the Pfahlenberg family actually came from this part of the prophecy. But why had Fernan suddenly triggered a new prophecy? And why was everything connected to Luina? Was this warning him that the events in the prophecy were about to happen soon? If that was true, then was the demon god Andromalius, one of the 72 demon gods, really about to descend into this world? Time quickly moved to the next day. Fernan sat in the carriage, repeatedly thinking over that prophecy. Andromalius was the 72nd of the 72 demon gods, described as a man with black hair, black eyes, and a snake coiled around his right arm. But no matter how many books Fernan searched through, that was all the information he could find. The war against the demon gods had taken place 1,000 years ago, so it was only natural that detailed records were scarce. In this era, demon gods had long since become myths. After all, the first emperor had supposedly wiped them out completely. Logically speaking, since Imitian was the savior in the prophecy, he would eventually deal with all the demon gods, so this should not have much to do with Fernan. The real problem was that the prophecy clearly stated Luina would suffer serious injuries in the battle against Andromalius. So, Should Fernan warn her about it? At that moment, he was deeply conflicted. He had briefly tried mentioning it once before. The result was that Luina treated him like a lunatic who had hit his head too hard. That meant he had to find solid proof that demon gods existed before he could convince her. Then, Fernan suddenly remembered a key event from the prophecy. In a month, during the first-year Night Department's training match, Imitian would defeat Barian, who was ranked second. After that, no one in the academy would be able to rival Imitian. And because of that, Barian would lose his knight title, his family's honor, and his position as heir. Then he would be swallowed by the anger and resentment in his heart, ultimately becoming possessed by a demon god. This was the perfect chance to prove that demon gods truly existed. What frustrated Fernan was that the prophecy did not mention exactly when, where, or how Barian would be possessed. That part of the information was shrouded in fog, impossible to see clearly. Did he have to meet certain conditions to unlock it? What a pain. As expected, this prophecy was built to screw people over. Meanwhile, the rumors about Fernan and Luina had never stopped spreading through the academy. Even now, no one could understand why Luina Belchev had teamed up with Fernan, and on top of that, the two of them had taken first place in the joint course between the Night Department and the Magic Department. Those rumors eventually reached Imitian as well. He suddenly remembered that Gardner, the soul inside the Soul Sword, seemed to really like the Belchev family, while absolutely despising the Feilenbergs. Gardner immediately snapped back, telling him not to put those two families in the same category. 1,000 years ago, the only knight who could stand shoulder to shoulder with him and the former emperor on the battlefield had come from the Belchev family. But now, people valued the Feilenberg family's wealth more than the Belchev's honor. The more Gardner spoke, the angrier he became. If that war 1,000 years ago had not required financial support, the imperial family would never have had anything to do with those nouveau riche upstarts. Then Gardner suddenly changed the subject, as suggested that Imitian go ask that brat Fernan for some money. His equipment looked far too old, and did not suit someone of imperial blood at all. Gardner continued as if it were only natural. The Feilenberg family never stated what they wanted outright. They were experts at building trust first, then wrapping their target firmly in their grasp. Fernan was treating Imitian so well because he clearly wanted to establish a connection with the Armian family. Imitian frowned, so Senior Fernan had approached him with hidden motives, but then he shook his head. He did not believe Senior Fernan had been kind to him because he wanted something. After all, when they first met and he had been injured by monsters, Fernan had generously given him a healing potion. He had also shown genuine concern for his wounds. At that time, there had clearly been no calculation in Fernan's eyes, so someone like Fernan should not be the type to treat trust as a bargaining chip. And asking Fernan for money felt far too shameful. Trust was not something that could be bought with money. Gardner roared, "You hopeless kid. Even the former emperor once said that having a wealthy supporter brings peace of mind. Are you telling me that just because he bought you one meal, you've completely gone over to his side?" The Feilenberg family has never been the kind of family that offers pure goodwill. Unable to withstand Gardner's urging, Imitian eventually went to Fernan's residence. The servant replied politely, "I'm truly sorry, young Master Imitian. I did inform young Master Fernan of your visit, but he said he is very busy right now, and asked you to head back for now." Imitian looked a little disappointed. Senior Fernan really was busy, and he felt that he had disturbed him. But Gardner muttered inside the Soul Sword that this was far too strange. People from the Feilenberg family would never react like this. Meanwhile, the attendant could not hold back anymore and asked Fernan why he had sent Imitian away, even though he had clearly been watching him so closely. Fernan set down the documents in his hand and said calmly that most people who came to the Feilenberg family wanted the same thing: money or resources. Imitian might have come for the same reason this time, but he was not the kind of person who could easily swallow his pride and ask for help. That was why Fernan sent him back for now. He could tell Imitian had not come here because he truly wanted to. Once Imitian fully trusted him, it would not be too late to pull him in. The attendant still could not understand. Was it really necessary for Fernan to go this far for a fallen imperial descendant? Fernan knew very well that Imitian had extraordinary character and potential. If he could make Imitian one of his own, the boy would become a powerful asset in the future. The attendant grew even more worried. By shutting Imitian out today, was Fernan not afraid of losing him completely? A calculating smile curved across Fernan's lips. Of course not. I'll leave him an opening. Go to the main family warehouse right now, take out every elixir inside, and send them to Imitian. Hyde's eyes widened in shock. The elixirs in the main warehouse were all ridiculously expensive. If they gave away something that valuable and failed to get the expected result, the loss would be massive. Fernan did not care at all. Then I'll give him something even more expensive. There is nothing in this world money cannot solve. And if money cannot solve it, that only means I have not spent enough. Not long after, Imitian received a box from the Pfahlenberg family, along with a note. Gardner impatiently urged him to open it, and see whether Fernan had sent it to apologize for turning him away earlier. Imitian opened the note and saw the words written inside. This elixir was prepared especially for you. Please accept it, Junior. From Senior Fernan. Gardner immediately roared in anger. That brat keeps stressing Junior and Senior in every sentence. Is he trying to say a senior stands above imperial blood? But the next second, his attention was completely captured by the elixir inside the box. Because what lay inside was actually the heart of the holy bird. The holy bird was a spiritual beast that wielded sacred light, and an elixir made from its core was perfectly suited for training the light-based army and swordsmanship. Gardner could not help muttering that the Pfahlenberg family really was a bunch of full-blown nouveau riche. Imitian held the elixir in his hands and silently swore that he would work even harder, so he would not fail to meet Senior Fernand's expectations. 2 weeks passed quickly. Ever since Fernan ordered Barian to be monitored, nothing unusual had happened at all. Fernan stared at the castle beneath the night sky, lost in thought. According to the prophecy, something major should have happened by now, but Barian spent every day either attending class or going to the bathroom. There was nothing suspicious about him at all. Then a terrifying thought surfaced in Fernan's mind. What if the part about Barian being possessed by a demon was false? The most important clue in the prophecy was proof that demons existed. If even that part was fake, then he would have to reconsider the reliability of the entire prophecy. Time soon skipped forward. After being defeated by Imitian, Barians finally faced him again during the midterm exam. But the outcome of this fight had already been decided. Imitian was not careless, and he would never lose to an opponent he had already defeated once. More importantly, he had Gardner Elfenfassen, the greatest soul mentor, by his side. But he did not know that the demonic energy quietly growing inside him had already begun, eating away at Barian's body and mind. Right after that, a violent headache struck. Fernan jolted awake from his dream. His face was filled with disbelief. Was he seriously seeing prophecies even in his dreams now? Still, Fernan forced himself to stand, his eyes snapping into focus. Now he finally understood the exact moment Barian would be possessed by a demon. It would happen after he lost to Imitian again during the midterm exam. Then, Fernan suddenly realized that the first-year night department's midterm practical exam was today. Prophetic fragments flashed rapidly through his mind. Imitian and Barian would face each other in the exam grounds, and Imitian's victory would not be luck. The reason he could defeat an opponent who seemed impossible to beat was because Gardner was secretly guiding him. Which meant, before that happened, Fernan needed to find a reliable helper. When Fernan found Luina, she had her arms crossed and was questioning him. Do you seriously need a bodyguard just to gather medicinal herbs? Fernan explained that if he delayed any longer, the medicinal effect would vanish, so he had to go now. Luina looked deeply unwilling, since she barely had time to spare while preparing for exams. Fernan immediately smiled, knowingly. If you come with me, I'll waive a few extra months of the Belchev family's debt interest after graduation. Before long, the two arrived at the Academy's northern mountain area. Luina was shocked. Right now, this place was being used as the exam site for the first year's midterm practical test. If students from other years entered, they would be punished for violating school rules. Fernan looked extremely pleased with himself. There is nothing in this world money can't buy. Luina stared at him with disgust, unable to believe he could openly admit that he had bribed someone. After that, Fernan and Luina changed into cloaks and moved forward quietly. They had to hide their tracks so the professors and teaching assistants would not notice them. Even though Fernan had bribed Professor Glad, openly wandering around the exam site would still cause problems. A short while later, Fernan suddenly stopped and pulled out a map. Imitian was currently in second place, and he was very close to Barian, who ranked third. Had they already fought? If so, Fernan had to hurry. Luina suddenly realized something. Wasn't the map in Fernan's hand a professor's exclusive map? A student possessing a professor's exclusive map was also a violation of school rules. Fernan immediately felt a trace of regret. Had bringing Luina here been a mistake? He had actually forgotten that this woman had such a strong sense of justice. Just then, a piercing monster roar came from not far away. The two of them stopped at once. Right after that, a desperate scream rang out. When they followed the sound and arrived, they found a first-year student lying unconscious on the ground. There were no obvious wounds on his body. It looked like he had lost consciousness after being attacked by a monster. Thanks to the defensive magic on his map, he had not been truly injured. But something was strange. The monsters around this area should not have been this aggressive. The ground was covered in chaotic battle marks, as if some massive force had torn through it, crushing even the surrounding grass and trees. Fernand's expression instantly turned serious. Damn it. This was happening earlier than he expected. He had not even had time to confirm Barian's condition yet. Just as he finished speaking, a massive noise erupted from deep within the forest. Right after that, a crushing pressure swept across the entire area. Luina immediately looked around. She could feel a heavy sense of unease spreading through the woods. She was just about to ask what was going on when she suddenly sensed deadly danger behind her. A huge monster was roaring as it charged straight toward them. Luina leapt into the air and slashed out a blade of cold blue light. The monster was struck head-on, sent flying backward, and slammed hard into the ground. But before either of them could relax, the monster actually struggled back to its feet. Blood poured from its severed arm without stopping. Instead, the wound only seemed to make it even more violent. Luina was stunned. Why isn't this thing going down? Its arm has clearly been cut off. The monster's blood-red eyes locked onto them, and a hideous grin twisted across its face. The next second, it slammed its remaining arm hard into the ground. Shattered stones flew everywhere, and the massive impact cracked the earth beneath them. Fernand quickly raised his staff as red mana gathered around him. In the next instant, countless rocks appeared out of thin air and shot precisely toward the monster's torso. The monster was struck by the dense barrage of stones and staggered back repeatedly, but it still did not fall. Its massive body merely swayed unsteadily. Fernand said in a low voice, "This thing has probably gone berserk. It can't feel pain anymore." Berserk monsters were completely different from ordinary beasts. They cared only about killing the target in front of them. The only way to stop one was to cut off its head. The prophecy had mentioned this before. Once the demon appeared, the monsters in this area would start going berserk one after another. Right now, the professors and instructors were probably busy dealing with sudden incidents all over the exam site, leaving them no time to notice this place. According to the prophecy, Barian would attack Imitian at this moment with all the mana he had saved up, and while struggling against an overwhelming enemy, Imitian would awaken to an even greater power. With that thought in mind, Fernand immediately raised his staff and warned Luina, "For now, let's take down that troublesome thing first." Meanwhile, Barian was kneeling on the exam grounds. His eyes were bloodshot as he glared at Imitian's back. He screamed fiercely, "You again, Imitian." Imitian turned to leave, without the slightest pause in his steps. Barian screamed after him, asking where he thought he was going when their duel was not over yet. Imitian looked back at him coldly. "It is over. The match has already been decided. You lost." Those words echoed again and again in Barian's mind, like a curse he could not accept. He remembered the mockery he had once heard. "There is nothing to apologize for. You have already failed the prince's expectations. What a pathetic fool. Your younger brother is far stronger than you." Those words stabbed into Barian's heart like needles. He had already failed his family's expectations once. If he lost again this time, he might truly lose his position as heir for good. With that thought burning in his mind, Barian knelt on the ground, with only one idea left. This time, he had to defeat Imitian. A violent surge of energy suddenly erupted from his body, and black demonic energy began wrapping around him. Barian's face twisted with resentment and rage. "Stop right there, Imitian." Imitian calmly turned around, already prepared to face the challenge. At that moment, Barian's attack carried a destructive force. But in the next instant, a flash of golden light cut through the air. Barian was knocked to the ground in an instant. The strike was terrifyingly precise, packing power far beyond anything Barian could handle. Inside the soul sword, Gardner looked utterly disdainful. "Why does this guy act like he's fighting for his life every time he sees you? He's this weak and still can't handle losing. What a disgrace. And now he has completely lost the spirit of a knight." Not long after Imitian left, Fernand and Luina finally reached the destination after fighting their way through the forest. Luina asked irritably, "So this is where that damn medicinal herb is supposed to be?" Fernand nodded, but his gaze was suddenly drawn to the figure collapsed ahead. Damn it, it looked like the fight between Imitian and Barian had already ended. At that moment, Luina cried out in surprise, and immediately moved forward to check Barian's injuries. Fernand quickly tried to stop her, but Luina had already reached him. "It's Barian Calberdin. Looks like he passed out during the fight." Fernand immediately told her to get away from him. Luina looked confused. Why would they leave an unconscious person here? If another berserk monster appeared, they should at least move him somewhere safe. Ignoring his warning, she reached out to help him up. But then, she suddenly felt a bone-chilling cold and a powerful surge of darkness. Every hair on Luina's body stood on end. She instantly stepped back. She had never felt an aura like this before. Thick, black energy began to wrap around Barion's body. Then, he slowly rose from the ground. Fernand's eyes turned cold as he explained, "These are the symptoms of demonic possession. Barion Kelburden has already been possessed by a demon." Fernand kept his eyes locked on Barion's movements, but inwardly, he felt something was wrong. According to the prophecy, once the demonized Barion awakened, he should have gone straight after Emetian for revenge. But now, it seemed his target had changed. Luina was stunned. Have demons really returned to this world? And how do you know all this? But before she could finish, Fernand cut her off. "We have to subdue Barion first. We can figure out the rest later. Just hold him off for about 10 minutes. Luina had not even had time to react before Barion lunged straight at them. Luina immediately raised her sword to block. Blue sword light slammed against Barion's weapon, producing a sharp metallic screech. A twisted grin hung on Barion's face. His attacks grew more and more ferocious, and Luina could only grit her teeth. She unleashed all her strength and blasted Barion back. But because demonic energy kept pouring out of him, her fighting aura was being consumed much faster than usual. At this rate, Luina would not last much longer. She was urgently trying to think of a plan when she suddenly saw Fernand waving at her from not far away. Luina was almost speechless. "Fernand, why the hell did you run just now?" Fernand calmly explained that he had not been running away. Barion had already turned into a demon, and he was not an opponent they could subdue easily. What Fernand had been doing was setting up a trap. Then he looked at Barion charging toward them, and a cold smile curved across his lips. Looks like he is just about to take the bait. Right on cue, a red magic circle suddenly lit up beneath Barion's feet. An invisible force instantly bound him in place, leaving him unable to move. Right after that, the overwhelming power released by the magic circle swallowed him whole. Luina cried out in shock. Was that really necessary? If Barion dies from this, we'll be in serious trouble. Fernand answered calmly, he won't break that easily. When the light faded, Barion indeed rose again from the flames. The demonic energy around him had not weakened at all. In fact, it had grown even thicker. If anything had changed, it was that they had made him even angrier. At that moment, a brilliant red gemstone appeared in Fernand's hand. He immediately began chanting a spell at high speed. The gemstone burst with dazzling light. Then a vast surge of purifying power rushed toward Barion. A huge red magic circle unfolded beneath his feet once again, releasing earth-shattering energy. Golden flames roared up, trapping Barion inside, while his agonized screams echoed without end. When the light finally faded, Barion lay motionless on the ground, and the black energy inside his body began slowly dispersing. Only then did Fernand let out a deep breath of relief. Good thing the plan worked. Luina, however, looked confused. Then she realized something. The gemstone Fernand had just used was worth a fortune, wasn't it? He had used it just like that. Did he not think it was a waste? Fernand nodded. Yeah, it hurt. A lot. But the situation was urgent, so there was no other choice. The guy was possessed by a demon. Didn't you see his blackened skin, bloodshot eyes, and that massive demonic energy that looked like it was about to devour everything? Barion had indeed looked like he could destroy the world earlier, but the body underneath was still Barion Kelburden. It had only been strengthened by demonic power. Then, Fernand suddenly realized something. Emetian Armian might be the hero destined to save the world. But right now, he was still only a first-year student whose abilities had not fully awakened. Luina was already stronger than Emetian. If even Emetian could barely defeat Barion, then Luina should have been more than capable of handling him. Fernand had actually made such a basic mistake. At that moment, his face filled with despair, and his mind was flooded with thoughts of the outrageously expensive scrolls and sacred relics he had just burned through. He had been so fixated on the word demon that he forgot what truly mattered, those ridiculously expensive items. How much money had that trap just cost him? Luina reached out with concern and waved a finger in front of Fernand's eyes. Are you okay, Fernand? Just then, Barion suddenly struggled back to his feet. The next second, he charged again. Almost on instinct, Fernand grabbed Barion by the collar and roared, "Do you have any idea how much money you just cost me?" Then he slammed a fist straight into Barion's face. Barion crashed hard into the ground, and this time he completely lost consciousness. Luina was startled by Fernand's sudden outburst. looking at Barian lying on the ground, not even knowing if he was alive or dead. She had no idea what to say. Afterward, inside a hidden room, Barian stared at the crystal ball showing the footage of his demonized rampage, his face full of disbelief. Was the person in that image really him? Fernan calmly explained that the recording orb had captured everything exactly as it happened, with no possibility of forgery. Barian could not understand it at all. After his fight with Imitian, he remembered absolutely nothing, and he had never even seen a demon before. How could they say he had been possessed? Fernan cut him off directly. Barian, you saw the recording orb yourself. You took a bomb head-on and had dozens of magic arrows pierce through your body. Not to mention the pillar of hellfire that swallowed you whole. The only reason you're still alive is because the demonic energy protected your body. Barian looked at the scene in the footage and felt a chill in his heart. Put that way, the fact that he was still alive was nothing short of a miracle. Fernan continued, besides, to stop your demonized self, we burned through a large number of precious items. Barian nodded. If Fernan was referring to the holy relics used to stop him, he would pay for them in full. Fernan immediately followed up. Then how do we account for emotional trauma? I was facing a guy who could make my whole life flash before my eyes at any second. At the time, I was even wondering if my life was going to end right there. As he said that, Fernan pulled out a contract. It's simple, Barian. As long as you become the slave of Fernan Fauenberg and sign here, all previous losses will be written off. Barian's face dropped when he saw the contract. This is a slave contract. Fernan shook his head and muttered. You really are ungrateful. Your senior is doing all of this for your own good. In that case, I'll have to handle this officially and hand the recording orb over to the Inquisitors. Barian's face instantly went pale. The Inquisitors were an organization directly under the Emperor. Their original mission was to find and destroy demons, and under the great cause of demon eradication, they had once held absolute authority. But after 1,000 years, demons had long since become legends, and the position of Inquisitor had gradually become little more than an empty title. That was exactly why they had always been desperate for a chance to return to the public eye. Fernan's voice cut in slowly. If the Inquisitors see this recording orb, they'll be thrilled. Barian, you were involved with a demon. The Academy will definitely expel you. And do you really think Marquis Calverdon will acknowledge a son who sold his soul to a demon? After hearing that, Barian finally picked up the pen and signed his name on the contract. From now on, I'll be in your care, Senior Fernan. After Barian left, Luina asked with concern whether it was really okay for them to handle this on their own. Should they not tell the Academy professors in advance? Fernan shook his head. He felt it was not the right time yet. They still did not know whether Barian had willingly sided with a demon or had been manipulated by someone in the shadows. If it was the latter, then they still had no idea why he had been controlled. And if Barian truly had been manipulated, that meant someone inside the Academy was already colluding with demons. If they exposed this publicly now, the mastermind would immediately go into hiding, and finding them later would become even harder. Luida asked in confusion whether Fernan planned to keep investigating. But why would they specifically target Academy students? Fernan analyzed the situation and said it was still only a guess for now. The Academy gathered the Empire's most promising talents. Attacking the students here was the same as destroying the Empire's future. After that, because of the Berserk monster incident, the first-year Night Department's midterm practical exam was cancelled halfway through. But the midterm itself could not be cancelled, so every practical exam this semester was changed into a written test. The Academy had always valued practical skill far more than written scores. For students who focused heavily on combat training, this was undoubtedly a heavy burden, and now, even Imitian was no exception. Inside the Soul Sword, Gardner felt that the more he thought about it, the stranger everything became. The previous Berserk monster incident was definitely the work of demons. Because he had sensed a faint but widespread trace of demonic energy, the demon itself simply had not appeared. Gardner had already said it many times before. The demons would definitely return. That was exactly why the first emperor had left him by the side of the direct descendants of the Armian bloodline, and the demons would absolutely target the descendants of the former imperial family. To them, the name Armian was an enemy they hated to their very core. If not for the Armian family, this world would have fallen into the demons' hands long ago. The more Gardner spoke, the more agitated he became. This time, they would definitely do everything they could to wipe out the Armian bloodline. Imitian, you absolutely cannot let your guard down. You must follow my guidance carefully. Imitian looked at the soul sword in his hand and wondered silently whether he truly would become the trigger that drew the demons in. At the same time, inside Rabidus Hall, Fernan suddenly felt another violent headache strike. A moment later, he forced himself to raise his head and a new fragment of prophecy flashed through his mind. It was a scene related to wilderness survival skills, a required core course for first years. A new crisis seemed to be quietly brewing. After the midterm exams ended, the academy would send the students directly to the southern forest for a 1-week survival training exercise. In a lake there, a spiritual herb was hidden. It was something the first emperor had deliberately placed there years ago. But the so-called spiritual herb was only bait. According to the prophecy, inside the cave where the herb grew, there was also a mithril vein capable of holding souls. At that time, Imitian would follow a certain sensation and enter a hidden cave. Then his eyes would lock onto a crack in the stone wall. A spirit beast would be crouching there. It stood on 4 thick legs, and the area around its heart was covered in gem-like blue scales. Anyone who approached could feel a bone-piercing chill. It was the barrier beast guarding the mithril vein. But Imitian would bring that spirit beast crashing down with a single sword strike. The stone wall behind it would collapse instantly. Then, glowing ore would be revealed beneath it. That mithril was known as a metal blessed by mana. More importantly, the sword in Imitian's hand had been forged from mithril and gold. Thanks to it, Gardner's soul had been able to remain in this world. As Fernan absorbed the sudden prophetic vision, he clutched his head in shock. A metal capable of holding souls was an unimaginably priceless treasure. So, Fernan immediately found Luina and laid out a new offer. "Come with me to the southern forest. I need to find a certain spiritual herb." Luina raised an eyebrow. "Last time you said it was an elixir. Now it's a spiritual herb?" Fernan waved his hand and said that this time he really was looking for a spiritual herb. The first year's wilderness survival training would last an entire week, which meant they would have to miss a week of classes too. But Fernan had already prepared a make-up study plan. As long as Luina agreed, he would handle everything related to their missed classes. And, before that, he would also waive all remaining interest on the Belchev family's debt. But Luina did not waver at all. She still refused to go with him. Just then, a red-haired man suddenly pushed the door open and walked in. "It has been a long time. Senior Fernan, may Mana be with you today as well." Luina looked at the red-haired man in front of her and asked, "Are you Jess Bynes?" Jess smiled and greeted her. "Hello, Lady Luina Belchev. May the blessing of Mana be with you." Then Jess turned to Fernan and casually asked whether Senior Fernan was doing well at the academy. Fernan nodded and said things were fine for now. As for Jess, how was life at the academy as a first year? That made Luina unable to hold back her question. From the looks of it, Fernan and Jess seemed quite close. But wasn't Jess supposed to be the next saint of the Dragon God Church? Who would have thought that a highly praised saint would be connected to a money-obsessed guy like Fernan? Jess smiled and explained that Lady Luina simply did not know the details. Since she was not a mage, there were some things she would not be familiar with. In its early years, the Dragon God Church worshipped the ancient dragon that gave magic to humanity. But over time, they shifted to worshipping mana and magic itself. Because of that, most of their believers were mages, and the church eventually became a powerful mage organization, and anyone who wanted to become an archmage needed recognition from the Dragon God Church. However, since the church was built and operated by mages, it required enormous financial support behind the scenes. And the Pfahlenberg family was the church's largest backer. Fernan then showed a smug smile. Countless magical items created by the church would eventually flow into the Pfahlenberg Merchant Guild. Luina watched the two of them go back and forth and could not help silently complaining. Was Jess really a saint? He looked more like another money grubber, just like Fernan. Then, she cleared her throat and said she understood their relationship now, and, since she wanted no part in this, she would excuse herself. After the door closed, Jess immediately dropped his smile and asked Fernan why he had called him here. Fernan told him they needed to gather a spiritual herb during the first year's wilderness survival training, and he needed Jess's help. Jess shook his head in confusion. Was it really necessary to collect it during the training? With his ability, he could sneak into the southern forest ahead of time and retrieve it easily. Fernan said that if he could do that, he would have done it already. Unfortunately, he still had not confirmed the herb's exact location. Logically, the information from the prophecy should have been enough to narrow it down, but the first-year wilderness training would take place around 7 lakes in the southern forest at the same time. So, he had no way to tell which lake the herb was hidden in. Over the past few days, Fernan had been secretly injecting mana into the bottoms of all 7 lakes, trying to trace the mana flow. But he had not found any sign of mithril at all. That made one thing obvious. The cave had been hidden by powerful magic, and ordinary methods would never find it. As annoying as it was, Fernan had to follow Imitian in order to find the entrance. After all, Only Imitian could trigger the mechanism described in the prophecy. Jess suddenly asked, "But students who are not part of the training cannot enter the site, right?" With students and instructors everywhere, sneaking in without being discovered would not be easy. Fernand smiled and revealed an appointment document for a teaching assistant position. That was exactly why he had applied to become a teaching assistant for the first-year training. Jess could not help admiring him. Fernand really was a merchant through and through. This plan was practically flawless. Then Jess rubbed his thumb and fingers together, saying that if Fernand was willing to give him a large amount of gold, he would go all out. And if Fernand could also draft a clear compensation document, that would be even better. Fernand could not help cursing inwardly. What a thoughtful little bastard. Meanwhile, in the southern forest, the noisy voices of students echoed between the trees. Inside the Soul Sword, Gardner told Imitian to go over the plan one more time. The spiritual herb was at Faden Lake to the west. They had to pretend to discover it by coincidence so they would not raise suspicion. So at first, they needed to act natural and wander around the area without looking too deliberate. But when Gardner saw Fernand appear there, he immediately scoffed. He could not believe this nouveau riche brat had actually come here as a teaching assistant. Imitian, however, looked delighted and said maybe Senior Fernand had come for the extra credit from being a teaching assistant. At that moment, Fernand was adjusting the uniform on a wooden doll. Then he bit his finger and dripped blood onto the doll's forehead. Jess chanted a spell, and the wooden doll instantly transformed into an exact copy of Fernand. Fernand asked doubtfully whether this thing could really pass the instructor's inspection. Jess confidently declared that he was the top-ranked first-year mage. On top of that, he had been using this spell to sneak out and play for ages, and not even the Pope had noticed. The Pope might be a legendary mage, but even he had taken several hours to realize something was wrong. Before that, he could not even be sure whether the person in front of him was really Jess. Fernand thought that should be more than enough. If it could fool the greatest mage in the world, no wonder people called Jess a genius. That meant this guy might become a huge help to Imitian in the future. But strangely enough, the prophecy had never mentioned Jess at all. He was this talented and the next saint of the Dragon God Church. There was no reason for the prophecy to ignore him completely. It was only natural for humans to hate demons, and the Dragon God Church despised them most of all. Legend said that long ago, a demon once blasphemed against the church's teachings, mocking the idea that magic came from dragons and claiming that magic was actually the power of demons, born from demons themselves. Those words enraged the church completely. From then on, whenever anything involved demons, the church became almost fanatical. It would not be wrong to call them a paranoid anti-demon combat order. So, would Jess one day become Imitian's ally? If that was the case, Fernand needed to build a good relationship with him in advance, just in case. Jess reminded Fernand that the doll's mana could only last 5 hours at most, so he had to return within that time. After that, Fernand climbed up a towering ancient tree and observed Imitian's movements from a distance. Right now, Imitian was heading west, and the only lake in that direction was Faden Lake. That made Fernand smile knowingly. Then, he called toward the shadows. "Now it's your turn, Barian." Barian walked out from behind a tree, his face filled with reluctance. Imitian frowned and asked, "Barian, are you trying to challenge me again?" Barian looked at him and asked back, "Am I not allowed to?" In fact, before the practical training began, Barian had once asked Fernand why he had to follow Imitian throughout the exercise, and at the time, Fernand had threatened him directly. "You still don't seem to understand your situation. Do you want me to turn your life into hard mode right now?" At that moment, Barian took a deep breath and said he could not accept defeat. Imitian asked in confusion whether losing twice was still not enough. Barian said it did not matter whether it was twice or 100 times. Losing to Imitian had ruined his reputation, so he had to challenge Imitian again and reclaim the honor that originally belonged to him. Inside the Soul Sword, Gardner marveled. Although Barian had not looked like much at first, he could now see what an outstanding knight Barian truly was. So accept his challenge, Imitian. But Imitian refused without hesitation. This practical training forbade conflict between participants. Gardner believed that kind of rule was meaningless. A knight should pursue honor no matter what. At that moment, Fernand was hiding in the distance, watching the scene unfold. Barian complained non-stop, but he was doing exactly what Fernand had asked. As long as he kept stalling, he could buy Fernand more time. Then Fernand turned around and ran straight toward Faden Lake, without hesitation. In the blink of an eye, he arrived at the lakeside. After confirming no one was nearby, Fernand raised his hand and set up a soundproof barrier. Now, even if he started digging wildly for mithril, he would not have to worry about the noise leaking out. Fernan rubbed his hands together in excitement. He could finally use this spell. Still, he had to find the mithril before Imitian arrived, so he had brought along something special for the job. He pressed his hand against the ground. Then he loudly chanted the summoning spell. My servant, by the principles of magical engineering, gather every magical technique and infuse it with the essence of a merchant and a mountain of money. A massive magic circle thundered open. Then a stone giant, crackling with purple lightning, slowly rose from within the circle. From now on, your name is James. Next, it's time to find the exact location of that mithril. Meanwhile, Barian was still following Fernand's orders, stubbornly blocking Imitian. Descendant of Armian, you heartless bastard, are you really going to just watch me fall this low? Imitian thought to himself that so much time had passed already, yet this guy was still this petty. Barian shamelessly clung to Imitian's legs. He even said he liked this feeling. He loved being trampled by others. It drove him wild with excitement, so Imitian should hurry up and attack him. Imitian kicked Barian away with a look of horror on his face. He was now seriously wondering whether Barian was some kind of hidden pervert. A short while later, Imitian also arrived at Fatum Lake in the western forest. There, he sensed an energy different from the rest of the forest. He looked down and saw that in the pool at the base of the rock wall, a plant, giving off a gentle glow, was swaying softly in the water. Meanwhile, deep inside the underwater cave, thunderous impacts kept echoing. The golem James was swinging its massive fists relentlessly, smashing them into the rock wall. Fernan shouted in excitement. So the mithril vein was hidden in here all along. On the other side, Imitian stared at the spiritual herb in front of him and found himself in a dilemma. Even if he had found the herb, how was he supposed to dig it out? A massive sea dragon was curled up there, guarding the herb. He had not expected the guardian to be a sea dragon. In that case, maybe it was better to come back another time. But then his gaze was drawn to a dark shadow beside the herb. Gardner said he had been in top form lately and could help hold the sea dragon back. Imitian asked in confusion what would happen if he fought the sea dragon himself. Gardner answered bluntly that the sea dragon would get to taste human flesh today. After all, that thing was far stronger than Imitian right now. Imitian felt a little disappointed and was just about to turn away. But suddenly, the cave began shaking violently, and stones started falling from above. The sea dragon was awakened by the thunderous noise caused by the golem. It slowly opened its deep blue eyes. Then its massive body uncurled, filling the entire cave with terrifying pressure. Imitian stood at the edge of the cliff, facing the sea dragon head-on. Since things had come to this, they might as well just kill the thing.